Hey, Virgil, welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm obsessed with ARC Raiders. I've been trying to organize an episode for this for a few months, so I'm really appreciative of you being here and wanting to talk about it. I absolutely love this game. I'm following Embark just kind of as a fan with interest since its inception. And I've been, really looking forward to Arc Raiders, and um, it did not disappoint, and it continues to not disappoint. Actually, it's one of the games probably. I mean, this game has pulled me into playing multiplayer with my friends in a way that I haven't done in a long time.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
It's really fun, and I've got a lot of questions and stuff to talk about. But I just want to, before we get into it, tell you an experience that I had in the game.
Yeah, sure. I love these.
This was the best. So I go topside. I'm solo, and I have pretty much what I think is a backpack full of the most legendary loot of all time. Lots of purple stuff. Just really like, oh my God, I got to get out of here now because I'm freaked out. And I finally get to my exit area. And of course, I'm fighting, NPCs. And I run out of ammo. I'm totally out of ammo. I kill the last one, and I am crawling on the ground into the elevator. The elevator opens. I crawl in there, reach up, and I get the thing, waiting for the doors to close. And right before the doors close, a raider comes out of the shadows, and he whispers, "Gotcha," and he executes me.
Oh, no.
And then I lose all my stuff, and then I go back. I have so much respect for that move. It was amazing. Like, I wasn't even mad because it was such a huge, like, Arc Raiders moment. And there's a ton of that in the game. So I really want to talk to you about all that stuff, but I also want to talk about your path of your career through games, getting to Arc Raiders. So, you're currently the design director of Arc Raiders at Embark, but why don't you fill all our listeners in with kind of how you got there?
Sure.
And how your career worked through.
Do you want me to go backward through time or start at the beginning?
Start at the beginning. I'm actually really interested in like how you actually found video games or creativity or game design, and how that became a passion that translated into a career that translated into Arc Raiders.
Yeah, it's a long series of accidents. When I was really young, I was obsessed with Lego and building stuff, and I think that probably was one of the ones, like, sort of a catalyst for a lot of it. And when I was a kid, my friends had computers and game consoles, and I didn't. So I filled in a lot of that, like, desire to play those types of things and do those types of things with my own creativity. So I remember, like, before I even knew what D&D was, like, writing in a notebook about, like, stats and abilities, and then, like, Lego sets and things like that. And I would, in, like, Microsoft Paint, draw, like, real-time strategy scenes that were, like, kind of echoing Command and Conquer and stuff at the time, like stuff I'd played at my friends' houses. And then I think my first game was like Castlevania 2 or something. Like, my dad took me to one of his friends' houses, and they put me in front of that, so I'd shut up and leave him alone. And then I eventually got a Sega Genesis and started playing that a lot. Got a Nintendo 64, played that, and then just kind of up through the things. And my cousins were big influences. They were a bit older than me, and their friend group played a lot of stuff. And that really influenced, like, what I played early on. So I got really into, like, RPGs on the PS1, and then I got into, like, more esoteric stuff. So, like, Armored Core was, like, a really formative game for me, about that freedom of, like, designing your robot and taking on stuff as you wanted to. And I think what kicked all of it off is a combination of StarCraft, Morrowind, and Half-Life 1, because those all had SDKs that you could use. So when I was about 8 years old, I started building levels in these games and like putting together scenarios and scripting. And I just became obsessed with doing that. And like most of my free time when I wasn't playing games went to modding and building stuff like that. So I'd build like Counter-Strike levels for me or like for my friends to play stuff on, or trying to develop like quests in Morrowind and things like that. And for the next like 5-6 years, anything that had an SDK, I would build stuff for. And I used to run with like an online group, like Persistent Worlds for Neverwinter Nights. So we'd build scenarios and have like persistent communities would come in, and I would like build new areas and events and things like that. And I did that for a few years. And then I just got really into like different MMOs, and one of which, to jump forward slightly in time, I never did anything professionally with games at all up until that point. And even into my late teens, early 20s, didn't even pursue it. It wasn't really the thing I thought I could do for any job.
What were you doing?
So I went to school once and I was like, oh, I'm going to do IT. I hated it and I dropped out. And then I ended up like moving around for a while. So I lived like on the West Coast of the US, moved back home, and didn't really have much of an aim, but I'd always been interested in food. And there was a culinary school in a nearby city that was really well regarded.
Wow, this story just got really interesting.
Yeah. So I went to culinary school and I did that for a couple of years. But during that time, I happened to be playing EVE Online, because you do, and buried somewhere in a forum for my alliance was a link to another alliance's forum for like just general game discussion. And I happened to click on it, and there was a post about a mod for Arma called DayZ. In fact, maybe even then, I don't know if it had a name, to be honest. And I was like the, 90th person to even download it. And I launched this thing, and my mind was blown. Like, never had any experience like that. I remember cowering in a shed, hearing people running by and like zombies, and then just seeing like a lone guy with a flare in the dark, just running for his life. And I'm there with my shitty Makarov with 8 bullets, going, I don't understand what's happening, and I'm really loving this. So that was like super formative for me. And then just, I don't truly remember what the sequence of events was, but I started playing with a group regularly who were also EVE Online players. And we played, it felt like 10, 12 hours a day for an entire summer. And then through them, I started playing games with Dean Hall, who created DayZ. And we just started playing stuff regularly and chatting about things. And, I went into, I used to like make mods for this and blah, blah, blah. And then at some point he was getting ready to exit his situation at Bohemia Interactive and asked if I wanted to join a project he was trying to spool up in London. And I was like half a semester from graduating, and everybody I talked to in my life was like, do you want to do this? I was like, yeah. And they're like, go. I was like, yeah, but school. And they're like, come back. Like, whatever, just go.
Yeah,
like
half a semester.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like ready to get my degree, and like, yeah, but so I just left, and then I was like maybe 23, 24 at the time, I think. So I got a passport. I got all my stuff packed up and moved to London, and I was there for a couple of years. We were trying to build a project on some like middleware a company called Improbable was making. And at the time it was trying to do like scalable large world stuff. And for a myriad of reasons, that project didn't work out and got canceled. And I found myself in a situation where the UK government was like, well, you need another job, or in like 3 weeks, you're out. But thankfully, just by the way things were lining up, Dean had already been forming his own studio in his home country of New Zealand. So he had been like getting that off the ground kind of while things were tapering off in London. So thankfully I was able to pretty smoothly get over there. And I started working for him at his company called Rocketworks. And I think the first thing I actually worked on there was like Valve had sent us one of the Vive dev kits, which was just like janky plastic and sensors. And I got thrown into a room with like two of our interns from a nearby like game design school, and it was like, I don't know, make a VR game. And so we learned Unreal 4 and VR at the same time while doing this, and that was quite interesting because back then, when you were part of the Vive developer program, you could just see and play every other Vive developer's game.
Yeah.
So I got to like chatting with random developers and like playing their games and like going back and forth on stuff. And then I think in about 3 months, we ended up shipping the game on that. It was called Out of Ammo.
Sure. I did VR development for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring up the seeing and playing other people's games. That was really the I was in on that too.
Yeah.
It was really that the way the VR community worked together at that time was like almost as fun as making the games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really interesting because it's like, how did you do locomotion? Okay, but what do you do about like the nausea when you do this and this? And then like, how do you interact with a menu, but you've only got this thing? And like, that was so fun to me.
I know. And it's crazy because none of us knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you have to completely throw out everything you know about game design and interactivity and mechanics.
Yeah.
Which was the big appeal to me for moving into VR.
Yeah.
But like, we take for granted in a video game that's not VR, walking up to a door and pressing a button and the door opens.
Yeah.
But now in VR,
yeah,
you do that. And
and
thinking about that and building it and implementing it and trying to understand what's best for the player in that was such a fun, crazy time, just like completely reinventing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a big challenge for me because I was still fairly early in my career at that point professionally and still had a lot of knowledge gaps. So then to be thrown into this entire adjacent scenario was also quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, the game came out, did fine for what it was. It was fun with the whole caveat of by the way, has to run at like 90 FPS in both lenses. And we're like, oh God. So like, we're like, all right, do we need normal maps on anything? Like take those off, whatever. It's just, everything's flat color shaders. And yeah, it was interesting. And because we were all brand new to Unreal at the time, it was 3 of us. I think our entire game was built like inside the player pawn in Blueprint. It was horrendous.
Wow.
So it'd be like, hey, where's the thing for reloading? It's like, we talk in directions. We'd be like, oh yeah, it's like down and to the left. And oh, it's like in the red box. And like, it was so deeply unsophisticated, but it did work eventually. It was kind of a fun game. And then actually another team there later on went and made like a sequel to it called Death Drive. And that was hilarious. It was so creative. Like they really took everything we had tried to do with that and ran with it. But yeah, from that point, I worked on a couple other internal projects. I don't think any of which ever came out. One was like it was meant to be like a procedural, like mission game where you're like a crew of like space marine type guys responding to like various distress calls on procedurally made stations and ships. And then I moved off of that and worked on something else, which was actually announced called Living Dark. And that was meant to be a like cyberpunky kind of procedural storytelling game.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where I got to move more into technical design. And that's what I did basically for my entire career from that point forward. So it was like building systems and implementing like tools and things like that. So I did a ton of work I made like a traffic system and a thing to generate like apartment buildings and like a combat system and a bunch of other things within that, as well as trying to do level design at the same time because there weren't very many of us working on it. I still really wish that project could have seen the light of day because it was very interesting had we hit our ambitions. But after about 3 years, I left RocketWorks and went to a different studio in New Zealand originally called Aurora 44, now called A44 Games. And I arrived at the tail end of their first game called Ashen, which is a Souls-like action game.
Familiar with it?
So when I arrived, they were wrapping up the main game, and I did do a bunch of work on the DLC that they did for it thereafter. And then my principal amount of work was on the follow-up game they did, not a follow-up to Ashen, but their next game, which was called Saltpeter in the end. And similarly, I did a lot of systems work and tools work on that, but I also started doing a bit of tech art. So I helped build a bunch of systems for generating the world, and I did like a nature propagation system for foliage and a bunch of other stuff. I can't even remember all the things I worked on at that studio, but it was a great um, place to just be by the structure of the project. I got a lot of cross contact with disciplines I hadn't really worked with as directly before. So I got to really broaden my skill set. And at the time I was very ambitious. So I was also doing a ton of home projects. And that was probably the biggest period of like growth for me in total, of just learning and trying and doing all kinds of different things. So I started doing 3D modeling and shaders, and started getting into proceduralism. So using things like Houdini to do like landscapes and things along those lines, just because I had some like really fantastic people who came from even other industries. So like New Zealand has a huge film industry, so like Weta, and they use all kinds of crazy stuff in their pipelines. So I got to really see how they did those very interesting things. And then I was there for about 3 years, and then I was kind of done with New Zealand at that point. So I just set my LinkedIn as to like, hey, contact me if you feel like it. And Embark was like one of the first, I want to say 5 or 6 that reached out, and I knew nothing about Sweden. So it was like a toss up between them. I think it was like Supermassive in the UK and one of the Ubisoft studios. And just as I kept looking more into Embark, I was like, this is super interesting stuff. And I took some interviews and just really liked the type of people I was talking to and like the ambitions they had. And so I was just like, all right, well, let's go.
It
And
seems
then,
like a very natural place for you to land based on the history that you just laid out,
yeah, yeah.
specifically with, you know, how that studio started and
Hmm.
the how to make games technology
Hmm.
first. Your background making all those things seems like a perfect fit for their
Hmm.
studio. So when you got there, was it working on projects or did you jump right into what would become Arc
Oh yeah,
Raiders?
immediately. So I was hired as a senior technical designer. Um, and I don't think I'm wrong. I think I made my first commit the first day. I immediately started working on what was the old game, the PvE only game.
Yeah.
I think I did like a revamp on the like loot container system, because it used to be back then it was more like Apex style, like crate pops open and there's items in there and like different colors and stuff. And I remember refactoring part of that for some reason as like my onboarding project to like learn, because um, rather than Blueprint, they work in Unreal, but rather than Blueprint, they use something called Angel Script, which is a scripting layer that's developed by another Swedish studio called Hazelight. So they make It Takes Two and Split Fiction, and it's overall a fantastic environment to work in. But there's a shift. If you're used to visual scripting, you have to go back to written code. But so that was part of my onboarding, is to like take all the knowledge I had from like Blueprint and other things, and I did some C++ in the past and use that as a springboard into the current ecosystem. So yeah, I pretty immediately started on working on systems for the game that was
Yeah.
back then, and this was in 2022, I think. So I got there in like September 2022, and at the time they were like, this game's coming out in like 6 to 8 months, and then they did the like reveal trailer. I forget exactly when that dropped now. Um, yeah, we were working toward that, and so we were building like everything around these like one-off boss fight type things with the giant machine learning robots and,
Yeah.
and things like that. But it was pretty difficult to like see the game then, because you had this gigantic open world and most of your time was spent just sprinting through nothing, hoping to get to the fight on time. And by then you get there, someone's already like flipped the thing over and blew it up, and you're like, darn, guess next time I'll run for 40 minutes and maybe have fun. Um, yeah, but it was a lot of just small bits trying to contribute. I was on what was called the World Team, back then I think it was called like Orange Pod or something. But yeah, just helping build loot system and build this spawning system for this other mechanic. And I developed a lot of, I guess, like proto versions of what's kind of in Arc Raiders today. So things like the Arc Probe and like all these more one-off things, but they were much more action oriented. Like the Arc Probe used to be this sort of monolithic thing with like literally a countdown timer on it, and you were like hacking into it and it kicked off this giant combat sequence. So I have like old dev clips of me like with dramatic music, just shooting drones while the countdown goes,
Oh
and
wow.
as just a lot of stuff like that up until we pivoted the game.
So, I mean, I as a as a fan and interested in the studio and the game, I was following all that, and so when that's happening, um, you're obviously kind of advancing on the team. I'm guessing based on your current role. How did that happen?
When I joined, I was like, look, I don't really want to be a manager. I don't want to lead. I just want to make stuff. And that lasted like 3 weeks. They're like, well, could you maybe like take a look at this? I don't remember the exact sequence of events. But we had another design director come on during that time. And at some point I picked up a bunch of lead tasks. So I was sort of overseeing the design on the world side of things. And then it eventually just evolved into an overall design lead role.
Yeah.
And I did that for, I guess, about 2 years. During that period is where we as well like shuttered the game and pivoted it. So I think the last stuff I did on the old game was I developed a couple game modes, one of which was basically like a defend the outpost mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's like waves of enemies that come. You're defending this like apparatus. You could build turrets and generators. It was fun, but it kept coming back to the problem we were having the entire time, which is like, what else do I do though?
Right.
Why am I even doing this beyond the fact that it's pretty fun? And I also did a thing, we called it like siege mode, I think, but basically you and several other squads had to like infiltrate the spaceport and take out these sub objectives, and then it would summon one of the giant robots, and then you had to fight that. And again, pretty fun, but like, why would I keep doing this?
So is the why would I keep doing this question the thing that was that the force function of the pivot, or was there, I mean, maybe it wasn't just that, but
it is, I would say, the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because in the way we were working back then, it was far more isolated. So you had one group like really focusing on the AI and doing cool stuff there, and one really focusing on weapons and combat and doing stuff there, and not a lot of cross contact. So it's like, oh, the enemies feel weak, we're going to buff them. And then it's like, oh, the guns feel weak, we're going to buff them. And then it just became this like nearly silent arms race. And
that's not the way to make games.
No, but people keep trying it. So yeah, it was never gelling. And then making those 2 game modes was one of the last like external tests we did in that period to like, is there something here? And again, all the ratings were like, yeah, this is fun, but what else? And then just by happenstance, I did those 2 modes, the outpost defense and the siege mode. But on the side, I was doing what we called salvage mode, which was basically go find loot, and the loot does stuff. And so I had already been plinking away at that. And then the leadership and directors team had like gone away for like an offsite. They disappeared for like 3 days. And during that time, that's when they made the deliberation. Like fundamentally, we don't think with the studio we are, with the capacity we have, we can't live up to what this PvE game needs to be in terms of content, in terms of interest and whatever.
You mean because of the I mean, Embark has an incredible roster of super talented people,
sure.
And the lineage of that studio and everyone who's come together. So it was like we need to do something much more substantial, and that's why
pretty much
what else are we doing here? Because a lot of studios could have just said, well, these modes are great, and there is a reason to put these out, and frankly, with that would have made sense for what we know of the studio up until this point.
Yeah, and the why was a huge portion, because again, it was like, wow, we've made this thing that is fun. Why do I keep coming back for hour 10, 50, 100,000? And at the time, the game was free to play,
right?
Which then also carries different motivations for players.
Yes, it's also a business.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, and basically the directors group went away. We had like our summer party, and then they came back and they're like, okay, game's changing. And like PvP had always been something we discussed. It just wasn't in the forefront. So it was like, okay, we'll flesh out the PvE loop more and then figure out how that would work. And the major downside we were facing is like up until that point, no one had even really thought about a metagame. Like quest givers did not exist. Speranza did not exist. Inventory did not exist. Like people try to pick out elements in the current game. Like, yeah, you can tell that's from when it was the PvE game. None of that existed. Nearly everything you see in the game today that's in the front end was built within the last year of development.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, like, well, once we had a target, we can hit it. That to our team's credit, like they
Yeah.
are fantastic. We just needed tangible goals. Um, so it's kind of funny. People are like, oh yeah, it used to be like a looter shooter. There was never loot. It used to be, oh, these quest givers. That's from when they had PvE, and it's like, no, it didn't exist either. So it was all just, everything's purpose built for what the game is today. The only thing we really salvaged was a lot of the older enemy designs, the ML tech for the bigger robots and the ones that walk, and then pieces of the world. But we've rebuilt all of those assets like twice over. So it'd be hard to know what even from the original things still are. Probably the code for zip lines. I think that's pretty ancient at this point, and everyone's afraid to touch it lest it explodes. Yeah, the game today was very, very largely built after that pivot.
Wow. That's super impressive. But again, that's kind of what you'd expect from a team so stacked. So the extraction shooter, the eternal question, you know, I think probably Arc Raiders is my favorite one. I love it. But you also see a lot of people saying that extraction shooter isn't a genre, right? I never really bought into that
Really?
because there's a ton of these games, and that is the actual definition of a genre.
Aha.
And there's a lot of people, putting their own spin on it, right? I mean, you could arguably say that about Battle Royale as well.
True.
So, I've got in my notes, Arc Raiders is a high tension PvPvE extraction shooter set in a grounded sci-fi world where massive arc machines dominate the surface, and you've got to do, all the stuff that we know you have to do. Would you describe that description as accurate?
I think for the game that is right now, yeah, it is accurate. And your point of distinction between it being a genre or not is interesting because maybe because of how it was born for us, I do view it more as a game mode. It's a set of rules in which you participate in this game, and I think our ambitions certainly lie beyond just the extraction mode because I feel like our game can hold a lot more than that one format. There's still like the affordances that come along with it, the like tension, the loss, risk, reward. I think all that has to remain true. But
yeah, I mean, I guess for me, if I look at Arc Raiders right now, and obviously you're going to do more, like obviously, but then does what we know as the game now become just part of the game? I mean, I know you can't tell me, but
but of course that's what we're talking about. We're discussing along those lines because, of course, our affordances now are very different than before we launched. Like no one remotely saw this coming. We moved our internal sales targets like 20 times because it just kept. We're like, all right, should we just stop guessing? I don't even know anymore. So the situation we're now affords us to kind of broaden what could be, and I think it's pragmatic for us to have those discussions. So, my personal take, not in a promissory way, but like what I believe is that this game does grow beyond this one format and it becomes more of a universe type thing. But, we'll have to see what reality lets us do in the future.
So more of an IP where maybe other games and modes can exist.
More plausibly modes. I don't think there's any current intent to try to do like another game. So it's, I think Warframe's a good example where they've quite rationally like added on new modes of play, but it's still centralized around a core aspect that runs through the entire experience.
So you talked about moving your sales goals, and I mean the game exploded. I mean, totally exploded, and pretty awesome critical response. And I would argue, again, for whether we want to call it a genre or a mode, unbelievable
Yes.
positioning in the market,
Yeah.
right? And it's, dominating. But it's dominating because it's really good. There's depth. Um, there's so many layers of
Mm.
what you can do here. And I feel I don't know how many hours I put into it. Lots and lots of hours. And I feel like for me, it's like a game. I feel like I could never get sick of playing this game. It's one of those like forever games for me.
Uh,
And um, what's interesting is I did one of these for Battlefield recently, and in Battlefield I can see pretty easy and could see why. There's a lot of I could see a lot of Battlefront style stuff in Battlefield,
mhm.
and I kind of see a little bit of that in Arc Raiders as well. Obviously, there's connective
Of
tissue on your
course. Yeah.
team
Yeah.
from there, but I think what I'm trying to get at is that this game came from, as most games do, a wide variety of people coming together, building something under one vision. And
Mhm.
as we've already talked about, the thing you start out making is very rarely
Yeah.
the thing that people end up
Yeah,
playing.
for sure.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because um, it's very it's so unique. Like there's the the art style and the way everything comes together and um the really deep systemic nature of the game
Mm.
is so fun. And that's one of the things that keeps me coming back is like I'm constantly fiddling around in menus, and I
Mm.
don't like doing that a lot in games, but it all feels really connected, and I'm really invested in my character, and I'm really invested in these moments I'm having with my friends.
Mm.
Um, we always talk about the kind of the emergent gameplay of that's that's the best part of some of
Mm.
multiplayer games. Um, how are you guys like trying to plan for those things to happen through really good systemic game design?
I mean, it's always tricky, and it's not entirely on purpose in that some of our earlier tests almost gave us false positives in a different direction in that the way we play internally when we test and then the way those earlier closed tests went, it was so much more of a bloodbath. I think because people knew that those tests were, in 2 days this is done and I'm going to just be hyper aggressive and play all, it's a battle royale almost. So it really colored some of our perspectives and even made us doubt some of the social systems that we were already investing in to some degree. So then to see it come out and see these like massive groups of people really appreciating the social aspect. Now we're doing whatever we possibly can to like better support or lean into that. So I think like the playable instruments was a good example. That has no real utility except to communicate with another player. It does draw attention from drones through the noise. So sure, maybe if you're really clever, you can tactically deploy a shaker to tilt tilt the odds in your favor. But then we expand that to more instruments, and now they play synchronized, and like that exists solely to have that social interaction in the game. And then so I think that always has to be an aspect we look at when anything new we add. Of course, there's stuff that just has very strict utility. A gun is a gun, and maybe we can find some quirky ways to make that have like interplay with other things, but it's still a means of like offense or defense. But certainly looking at our set of gadgets, our set of deployables, our set of grenades, and seeing how else those systemically, as you're talking about, fit into that whole paradigm, and how do I employ those in ways that let me feel clever while creating a bit of a moment with other players.
Yeah, I mean, you just said a gun is a gun. I mean, I've lost so many guns that I was really attached to.
Well, at least in the way they work. A gun is
Yeah,
a gun.
well, but I mean, as upgrading weapons is not, you guys didn't invent that, but it feels very meaningful in the game because, and there's all these these things all fit together. That's why I keep talking about systemically, because I think it's a quite brilliant systemic game design that actually goes past game design into experience design, in my opinion. Right. But like when you combine the fear of what could happen out there, which is real, and that's very hard to, like, most of that stuff comes from this kind of soup of, oh, let's design these systems and this type of game, and then organically you get like, that fear feeling that comes when you're up on the surface and doing all the things that you have to do or want to do, and then you fold in this whole this whole community of players who are like nice to each other, which is another thing that you could never predict. Right. And those are the things that make this game and the experiences I'm having really fun and really unique, because it's not an absolute melee of chaotic fighting. It's like, seeing someone is rare. Right. And those are really intentional decisions. And I'm just kind of curious, like, how did some of those kind of work out? Was the thought process like, we have to make it feel, the tension feel insane when you're up there on your own? Or was it like, did that happen organically from other things?
Honestly, I think it was a bit of both. I mean, of course, because we were intentionally developing an extraction game and the tenets to come with that, like, yes, loss is permanent and whatever else. So of course we did manufacture it to a degree. Like, there's no reason the extractions need to scream in flashlights when you hit them, but they do.
Yeah, they really do.
And it's up to players to, how do they utilize that? Do they hit it and then stand there in the open and get shot? Do they hide in the bush? Do they hit it and then run away somewhere else while people run to that one? And I think a lot of it just comes back to like affording choice. But certainly things like, the number of players we have in a session, the way in which they join the session, all of that does contribute to what you're talking about. And that was very intentionally chosen in terms of like the cadence, the amounts and things like that. So like we knew if a map is like X dense, then the player count should be Y dense to sort of complement that and stuff. So and the way the levels are laid out as well, there's like, of course, the major points of interest, which are draws to people generally. And then there's the stuff that people discover along the way, or the things that are like named but smaller on the map. And that's all laid out in a way relative to spawns and extractions where we kind of like, you never know that someone's going to follow a path you prescribe, but it's very statistically likely that they'll go to, oh, that looks interesting, I'll go there. And then we just do that to create collision points, is how we refer to it, as like player collisions. So and we phrase it that way on purpose because it's not a player fight. It often could be, but sometimes it's just, oh, hi, you want this rusted gear? But it's just creating those moments where players can run into each other and then their own desires take over from that point.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because a lot has been talked about this game specifically, and those social moments where, the guy comes up behind me and says, "Gotcha." Yeah. I mean, he definitely whispered it too. He's like, "Gotcha." Right?
Proximity voice.
Or people saying, "Hey, there's some good loot here that I can't take, or do you want this?"
Yeah.
I mean, that never happens. I mean, in other games.
Yeah, right.
Right? So like, were you guys noticing that and going, "Oh, this is like a really interesting thing. Like, how do we lean into this and exploit that for the game? Because this is different, and it is. I mean, it obviously had to come up in playtesting before the game came out. So I'm just really curious about that. And I know a lot of people listening to this will want to hear about that too, because it's the number one thing that people bring up when I talk about arc raiders, which I do a lot to the annoyance of many people. So yeah, let's just kind of talk about that
Yeah.
because it's so cool and so absolutely fucking refreshing to play a game where people aren't just automatically in dick mode.
I mean, some still want to fight, and
Yeah,
that
that's never going to
we
go
afford that.
away.
Yeah,
But it happens so much less.
yeah, and I think this whole thing manifested mostly out of two areas that we didn't even necessarily know would interact. One is that a core like principle of the project has been approachability, because extraction games in particular up to that point had generally been there's a lot of pushback on the player. They're very
very hardcore.
exactly.
Yeah.
So very fiddly, lots of like very, very small details. And if you're very into that, and I play a lot of games like that. I played Dwarf Fortress for years. I played EVE Online, as I mentioned. If you want to do like a real deep take, like Aurora 4X, if you know what that is, like crunchy systemic games. I love that stuff, but it's not approachable.
It's not for everyone.
I don't want you have to watch 9 hours of YouTube tutorials to be like, all right, I feel confident in hitting start game now. But those games do afford a great deal of like not randomness, but just a lot of things can happen, and a lot of them are a direct result of your actions. And I always find that to be incredibly interesting. So, in the way we approach a lot of our systems, they are relatively simple. Like upgrading is relatively simple. Attaching mods is relatively simple. Crafting is relatively simple. We want it to be approachable. But then whatever can be done with it after should allow some freedom and choice in there. So that was kind of one facet, is all the systems in the game. Like if there is information to be had, we want it to be in the software. We don't like to, or rather we endeavor to not make you have to have like a map or a wiki on another screen. We don't want to give away everything, because I know, of course, those online maps are like, yeah, the plant spawns exactly here at these coordinates, and I want to know that as like a player trying to metagame and whatever. And that's okay. But principally, core information we want just in the game, and it's told to you wherever we can. And we're not perfect at it. And then all of that was just manifesting in how we're building and designing these systems. And then there's almost a concurrent effort within the studio, which actually took us quite a while to even get solid backing for, to like, hey, actually these are good endeavors, is the social side of things. So things like our ping system. There was resistance at points of like, well, why does the ping system need all these other things to say? And that whole thing became this umbrella we just call nonverbal communication. So can I articulate my wants and needs in the game without needing to speak to someone? So if I ping my gun, I can communicate any ammo, or if I ping my quest, I can communicate I'm on the quest, or if I ping a place, can I say, let's go there, let's not go there, watch out over there, and just really expanding that to afford communication. And then I think that bled over a little bit to once we started doing proximity voice, just because we wanted to have those actual tangible human interactions. And then
the proximity voice, particularly in this game and within the kind of core gameplay loop, is essential. It's really well done.
Yeah, and the fact that our audio engineers are insane and it sounds so like grounded in the world, I think helps a lot. And then on the side, I don't truly remember how it originated, but the tech we use to let you alter your voice if you so choose, it mostly started out as kind of a feature for people who didn't feel comfortable talking in games, and for especially if they're like, tend to be targets of harassment or other things. So it was like a means by which you could still feel welcomed to participate in what we felt was a very core experience of the game, and not have to like put yourself out there. And it's been really nice hearing back from players that like, yeah, I don't talk in any other games, but in this I can.
I mean, that's me. I don't talk in any other games, and I've turned my headset mic on when I play this game, and it's almost like it makes me feel good about humanity in a way,
That's good to
because
hear.
like it's just so cool to just have a nice interaction with someone, like, don't shoot, I wasn't gonna.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just looking for stuff, and hopefully we can help each other at the elevator.
Yeah.
That's like such a impressive thing to carry out in a game. Many have tried, many have failed. And I think that experientially, it's one of the core things that I think keeps people coming back. I know I keep coming back from it because there also is that moment where the guy could shoot you in the face.
Yeah.
You know? And when that happens, it doesn't feel like I hate this person. It's like, okay. I mean, I put myself in that situation, you know, and he took advantage of it, or she, or whoever. But yeah, it's a very powerful game experience, and I feel like I just haven't had that experience like that maybe ever.
The getting downed by others and not hating the situation is quite interesting, because we went through a number of iterations on what it was like to be downed by another raider. And originally, you would just go into the down but not out state, crawling around, and the only way to like fully finish you off was to just keep shooting you.
Yeah.
Or because, you know, that costs ammo, they take out their raider tool and just beat you to death with it. And that feels bad. You're like, I'm already down, and then you're just like whomping on me, and I'm just watching this happen.
I have to admit, I've done that.
Well, and it can still happen, but that is why we did the punch out, because then it's a cleaner moment.
Yeah.
And then also it used to linger on your body and just be like, wow, that was bad. And you're just watching this person like pick through your stuff. And then at one point we're like, what if we just cut to black? And then we did that. So like the moment your health hits 0, you get that black screen.
Yeah.
And then later someone added quotes to it from like other raiders out there. But we found that like almost instantly that really softened the blow. So you're not just sitting there dwelling on this moment of like failure or embarrassment or like, I just got trolled to death, to like, it's done. And here's like a pithy quote maybe to like soften the blow. And then you're like, that was whatever.
Yeah. It makes dying and losing almost a joy in a weird way. But like, I've had that experience where I'm like, I know I'm going to kill this person, but I can't really waste my ammo.
Yeah.
Like,
for sure.
Like, again, really good emergent systemic design there. All right, so I made a probably a clumsy core gameplay loop list.
Sure.
Pair, deploy, engage, decide, extract or lose, upgrade, repeat. Seems
it's pretty on track. Yeah,
seems
that's kind of the size of it.
Yeah. So where do you think in the core loop you could see where do you want to see it improved?
I mean, definitely like something we're actively working on in pieces is the front end experience. Can I more quickly, more capably do the things I want to do there? So you're not changing screens so much. You're not doing so many clicks. Like what convenience or quality of life things can we do there? Because I think,
well I've got one.
Go for it.
First of all, I have no complaints about this game. I really, really think it's well done. The only thing that I think could maybe have some address time is I get really frustrated with the info pop up when you're going through your inventory. It for some reason I just like I need to see more of the stuff.
Yeah,
you know, it's like a personal gripe, but it's, you know, I'm not going to stop playing the game.
Do you play on controller or mouse and keyboard?
Controller.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think definitely like that's where we had probably the least time to get like as good as we wanted, but all of it's being actively iterated on. It's not as though we're gonna like fire a magic bullet and we fix it all at once, but definitely like, you know, our UI UX team cares incredibly deeply about getting this experience right, and a lot of it's just like consequence of time, consequence of resources, and now we just have to keep picking away at it to improve it. But
yeah, I mean the UI in this game is incredibly well done, but it's also I mean the amount of information you have to convey to the player it's a lot.
That's the hard thing, is when you have a lot of these complex interrelated systems, then it becomes an even extra challenge to be like, all right, well, how do I God, is it important on the screen that they understand that it relates to this, or is it only when they're in this context they need to see that relationship? Or do we show everything at all times? Do we have a screen that should do that? And then you just get down these rabbit holes of like,
Yeah.
and then, okay, well, what about a player who's already like mastered the game? Do they care about seeing this at all times? Okay, do we make it modal? Is it toggleable? And then you just have to like strike for the mean of like what benefits probably the most people. And then you start going down those like nuance rabbit holes to
Yeah,
like extend things.
that is a such an important thing, and it never ends,
No.
right? It's it's such, especially in a game like this.
Mm.
I also wanted to talk about um the game design and the kind of emergent stuff around PvPvE.
Mm-hmm.
There's just some absolutely bonkers fun and insane moments when that whole soup
Yep.
gets going, and especially at the end, because you don't actually know if if the PvP is actually PvP or not, right?
Mm.
It's PWE, player with player.
Right.
I just made that up. um and so when you have that whole, you've got, the exit countdown, and there's 1,000 drones of various sizes.
Yeah.
Like, that is a very super fun moment. Um, how do you guys keep the tension up in that moment?
I mean, I think I don't remember when we did this, but of course the extractions do shut down over the course of the session, which
Yeah.
then compresses it because all of it is this balance of keeping the tension as high as possible for as long as possible, and that ends up manifesting in a few ways, or we make it manifest in a few ways. So contentious topic, but we have the late joins, so you can join a server like the cutoff is at 18 minutes, and then depending on your load time it can be a little longer than that, which of course isn't ideal for a number of reasons, but that helps keep the player count higher for longer. And you can't do that like metagame math of like, oh well, I know this is a 25 person map and it's been 14 minutes, so that means there's probably only 6 players left and they're probably here. So we do a lot to just remove that capability in the way we inject players into a round and things like that. And then the extraction shutting down compresses it, so we know over time, like statistically, how many players are left at a given point. So then the action that remains gets compressed into a smaller area, and it's sort of like a soft circle from like a battle royale, because of course you can go off and use a raider hatch or
Sure.
try to hide in whatever else. And then the drone compositions and things like that, they maneuver around those areas. So the same way I talk about player collisions in terms of like the way the level's laid out, then the activities themselves act that way too. And the extractions, of course, are the largest player collision point we have.
Yeah, I would imagine that to be true. I can't remember the name of the tall cylindrical floating drone robot that's
The Shredder?
super power. Yeah. Man, fuck those guys.
They were a fun one to have come together, because we're like, all right, we're making Stella Montis. It's a bunch of tight corridors and rooms. What's the worst nightmare you could have in that? I'm like, how about a thing that is a shotgun in every direction?
Yep. Yeah. Those things are awful. I hate those things.
Yeah.
But again, it's interesting with the PvE part, because it's immensely satisfying to take one of those out, and then of course it becomes things that are very useful for you in terms of crafting and upgrades and stuff. And this game, with all of the elements and the systems, it really feels like you guys suffer from the problem of too many good ideas. When you're like kind of designing around something, and it's past blue sky, but it's still in that kind of thing where you're just like, oh man, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. How do you guys stop?
Yeah, it is of course a problem, and even now when you we have a suggestions channel in Slack, and even now that the game's live and being activated up, it's still like, what about this? What about this? What about this? Could we do this? Um, and a lot of it came down to, at least certainly on the design side, of like how we approach stuff philosophically. And what we ended up settling on is what I call like intent-based development. So it always starts with the core of intent. What's the experience I intend players to have? What's the progression I intend them to have? Like whatever else, and then basing it all around that. And if you can't motivate that intent all the way across, that's when we kind of like tweak or get rid of ideas. So, someone might suggest like, oh, if we change the inventory system in this way, now it opens up this like new gameplay avenue. It's like, yes, but if we do that, then this becomes more tedious and this is more difficult to understand. And then now you can't do this anymore. So let's go back to our like intent, or like what's the problem statement that we're trying to address here.
Would you say that's a big part of your role, is kind of keeping track of those things, and kind of always, are you the decision maker in those kind of things, or more like the shepherd?
I'd say it's more so the shepherd, but certainly there are points where it's like, look, we either deliver 50% of what we talked about, or do we do this other thing? And that's usually where calls have to get made between myself and the other like directors and things.
Cool.
But yeah, we put a great deal of responsibility on the team for this. And what we try to do whenever possible is present the problem statement to the developers. Like, here's what we're noticing, or here's our ambition for this, or here's some feedback we're seeing from players. Like, pitch back to us what you want to do about it and motivate it. And we do that for the vast majority of our features. It's very, very rare where we'll be like, do this thing without any sort of like dialogue. In fact, even in those cases, there's still dialogue around it. So it's also easier on me to let the experts in their fields like tell me what we should do,
Sure.
and then workshop it. And then usually it's more on me to just be like maintaining a higher level view of things. Like, okay, well, if we do this, it affects this, and that team's doing this right now, and we have to make sure that for this upcoming feature that this keeps that in mind then, because then they'll be around at the same time. So it's mostly just, massaging things into place and making sure people are supported in what they're doing.
You mentioned play tests, and I was curious. This seems like, a playtest person's kind of dream game, because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the game right now that you guys were unsure about, but or not really expecting, and through playtests and players, you were like, oh my God, people are really responding to this, and we didn't even kind of see that before?
I don't know if there's something that was like wholly unseen, but we certainly went back and forth quite a lot about the difficulty of the arc drones. It went from like, oh, they're all basically cannon fodder apart from like a few that were a little more deadly, but even then you could really handily take them out if you're even half paying attention, to, oh, they're actually extremely deadly. Like the Leaper, for example. You like, if that got you, you were dead, like period. There was no counterplay for a little while in some of the like balancing passes we had earlier on. But of course, that's not very interesting for you as the player. You're like, oh, I couldn't even really learn from that situation. I just died. Because what it would do is it'd jump on you as it does today, and then just jump on you again. And you're like, oh, well, that was cool, I guess. So I think it took us a little while to dial that in. And of course, that's always like working alongside the weapon balance. But we did find after a while that it was better that early on it was a touch overwhelming, even the more basic ones. Like, oh, these things matter. I have to respect even the Wasp and Pop. Like, I have to actually respect their capabilities in harming me. And if I ignore them, that's going to be to my detriment. And then it goes up the scale, obviously. But having them be a significant threat wasn't something that was actually realized in the game until fairly late.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's like an encounter is like indomitable, but what I would say is that I have a healthy respect for every single one of them. And I'm definitely like, even from the lowest, right? I'm like, I'm just going to go the other way.
Hmm.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with this right
Yeah.
now. they're they're really well done, and there's such a variety of them. And like, of course, when you're making games where it's PvE and you have all these different types and archetypes,
Hmm.
that's when the real magic of like combining them into encounters
Hmm.
comes alive. Is that all pre-planned, or is that procedural, or how do you pair them up together?
I mean, so yeah, we hand author like we call them compositions.
Okay.
So if it's like one hornet and two wasps, or if it's a bastion with this, so we do author those, and that generally plays off of their capabilities of like what one could anticipate a fight unfolding like. It's very hard to like truly plan for because players could be armed with anything and throw anything or
Yeah.
do this maneuver or hide in a building or not hide in a building. So, you know,
So
it's
is it like they're like prefabs that designers can call, where it's like, oh, you know, this one's got two of these and one of these,
hmm.
and or is it like how do you guys design your
Yeah, it's a
encounters?
bit of both. So many of our things do have some element of choice in them or randomness. So for say the Bastion, we might author a few compositions, and in some levels we're okay if it chooses any one of them.
Mm,
Because yeah, fine, it mixes it up a little bit, and that may change with the position it spawns as well. Um, or we might author one very bespokely, like a very bespoke one, for example, is the bombardier and its two spotter drones because they work together,
yeah.
right? Um, and then we author the locations in which these compositions can spawn, and sometimes those mix around. So in one session, you might see Bastion here, and then it's over here, and then it's over here. And then as well, sometimes there won't be some presence, and there will be some present depending on the map you're playing or the map condition you're playing. So like Night Raid on Spaceport has a different composition than standard Spaceport
Interesting.
does. And then, um, on top of that, it is a bit situational. So some world activities draw attention from drones, which shifts where they are in the world. And then as the session starts to wind down, like the clock starts running out, new groups can appear based on certain conditions. Um, and then you've got things you can throw in the mix, like people throwing the snitch scanner or getting spotted by snitches. Obviously, that summons new drones and things like that. So it's kind of a mix of a lot of things put together. And
It
then,
it feels really like fun and organic
mm,
in a way. So it doesn't feel like very like, oh, here's this combination
oh,
all the
well,
time,
good.
you know.
Well, that's something we're actually working on right now is like getting even more nuance in there because I think if you play enough, and certainly we have at this point, we're like, yep, that's this group, and they're probably going to be around here, and then it's going to go over here and do this thing, and we're trying to open that up a bit more. Like right now, we don't. For a long time, we authored patrol routes for the enemies. Like here's a spline, and you follow this, and we have things called, I think we just call them smart objects, but it's like, oh, a drone can develop an interest in this, and then if you ever watch them and you notice they kind of like they might go down to a car and like check it out, or go look through windows and peer along them, like we author those situations, but they choose to go engage with it.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and then rather than authoring bespoke paths for them to follow, we have what we call a flow area. And so we're like, this is just your region of influence, and then you figure out how you want to move through it. And they have some general rules like
Based on all the options that you've given
the
them.
options, as well as just some internal logic of like, yeah, don't just constantly ping pong and change direction. Don't like do U-turns. Like, don't just keep choosing to do that. But they will like kind of make their own decisions about how they move through it. And of course, they respond to stimuli from you as the player and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like I'm going to patrol this and stop here and
Mm,
scratch my butt and then turn around, and
yeah.
you know it,
And
it
we
doesn't.
tried that, and it just became very formulaic because you're
Yeah,
like, okay, I'm infiltrating spaceport. 1, 2, 3. There's the snitch, and you're like, ah.
yeah,
And then you randomize, and you're like, okay, it's a little better. But then, credit to our AI team because they're the ones who pushed for this. Which initially I think got some resistance from designers because like, but we have to control the patrols here, and then the loot's there, and then it's just like, well, here, just try it and see how it goes.
have you seen that that kind of funny viral thing on the internet where the woman she has this tin bucket and she cuts a bunch of different shapes top, like a triangle or a circle or a crescent moon, and then she has the wooden
Shapes.
she has wooden shapes that go to the thing, and
she's just losing her mind
because everyone's putting it in the same hole because you can. That's like, the every time we talk about like designer intent, it's like you have very little control over that, and when you do design very specifically for that, then it gets sterile, right? I mean, I guess it depends on the game.
Well, sure, and there's some games where that's kind of the point, is to like recognize those patterns and stuff. But I don't know. I think for the type of experience I would want, you kind of can't. And I even run, like I on and off run like tabletop games. I like DMing, and like probably 8 years ago, I stopped planning my sessions. And I have my overarching plot in mind. I have the premise. I have the context. The players are the ones doing stuff, because after a while, you write these meticulous notes and like, here's what's going to happen in this session. And then someone sees like, I'm going to go in the river now. And we're like, what? No, dude, no, don't.
I didn't even think about the river.
So now And so now, I think that philosophy applies here, is like, just let stuff happen and hope that we provided enough guardrails to stop it from being insane. And it still is insane. I watched a clip like yesterday of someone figuring out the exact combination of things to do to launch the matriarch like 500 meters in the air. And we're just like, how? All right.
Yeah. I mean, those are things you can never plan for, but the players always figure it out. Yeah. They figure out how to do it. And it's fun watching those things, but also it's like, wow. Skill tree, player progression. A lot of times when I play games that I like, but maybe I'm not super invested in, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll do this. I am like Sophie's choicing every skill point that I get, because they all feel really meaningful to me, and I'm actively thinking about how if I can scavenge more quickly and more quiet, like that one upgrade is really meaningful in the in the battlefield. It feels very well done, like the choices and the skills that you guys chose to highlight feel really, really good. And as a designer, when I think one of the great things about this game is that it goes back to what I was kind of saying earlier, where you have this like bounty of things that you can do, because the core foundation of the design is so strong. Like talk a little bit about what went into the skill tree, because maybe I'm just the person who's super into the game and it feels actually really meaningful to me, or maybe I'm not, but it feels like the amount of thinking about what those things do exactly maybe went a little above and beyond some other games I've played recently.
I mean, it was a tough problem space for us, and I don't think by any means we like nailed it. Definitely there's some skills on there that, as we've seen how players actually play the game, because of course we operate by our own intent or even theory, but by how players actually engage with the game, and also some of the choices we've made since then about how certain systems have changed or certain progression loops have changed. There are definitely skills in there that are like underserving their purpose. And, a lot of thought went into like, whenever possible, I don't love things that are just small statistical changes, but they do serve a purpose, as opposed to like, oh, I have an entire new ability now, or I can do this thing now that I couldn't do before. And that becomes a really tricky situation for us, because we have PvE, which is easier to balance around, than we have PvP, which is not. So it became the situation of like, oh, do we really want, someone who invests in this wing of the skill tree to be like obviously more capable, and like because they chose those, they're going to win over someone who like invested in the red tree instead.
Right.
So it's it's a tricky problem space, and like it's, we're evaluating some pretty significant changes to it to better serve the game that exists today and the game that will exist in the future. But it did come back to like, can the skill tree with its composition paired with things like augments and your preference for weapons, as well as like the gadgets you choose and the grenades and things you might bring, can that help all come together to form a play style for you? So do I want to be like the sneaky looter or the guy who wants to be super agile and like maneuver around and things like that? And I think we moved toward that ambition pretty well, but I think it's, there's more to do there. I think at this point to make players feel like they've truly rounded out like a set of choices that amalgamate into a playstyle choice of their own.
What kind of players do you have? Like
way more than we anticipated early on. We had pretty like, there's going to be PvPers. Yeah, got it. There's going to be PvEers who favor that. There's people who want to sneak. People who only care about looting. Then there's people who like explore. And then it was mostly like, how do we cater as best as possible with the systems we have, like for those types of people. And now we've got people who are all over the place. Like we have people who literally only play socially. Like, I go to make content for myself and others, like, and like I mentioned earlier, things around like the instruments and stuff, they don't have any other utility beyond that facilitation.
Right.
So, I think with how we've seen so many players just organically come together to interact or solve challenges or go through things like that, it's like, what do we do to help make that more interesting? And can we have a gadget that works with another gadget to achieve a different result, or start mixing stuff like that? I think is where we really want to try to put some emphasis.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, again, I have so many things I could ask you. We could do this for 5 hours. I mean, I could. You probably don't want to.
I might get a little sleepy at some point. We'll see.
Was there anything that that you can talk about that you had to like what cuts really hurt you?
We have a plethora of incredibly interesting gadgets and like other weapon types and like throwables and stuff that just due to like completely non-viable in a PvP game in the state it was, like we cannot have this, to things that we just did not have enough like bandwidth to actually make all the way. And probably one of the ones I remember most fondly, and I still want to try to find a way to bring this back, was essentially like a physics tether where you could grab an enemy and then just like smash them into stuff. And this existed in the PvE version of the game because you could grab like a wasp and then just smash into a wall. Oh. And just, so it's sort of like gravity gun from Half-Life type of thing. That was a really interesting thing, and it had a lot of really fun gameplay opportunities. I still remember an early public test we had where players found how to use this in some really funny ways that we didn't account for. So like if you know the Surveyor in the game today, the large ball that just tries to run away, it used to be a combat drone, and it had like these dual shotguns when it opened up. And it was very harmful and tough because it had the armor, and back then we didn't have the concept of like armor penetrating ammo, so it was just invincible until it opened. And so players got so sick of dealing with it that we used to have this map that had like some giant pits in it, and they would just pick them up and drop them down the pit. Yeah. Or they figured out that if they picked them up and like turned in a certain way and let go, they could just launch them out of the map. And wow. I like those moments of invention where players figured out goofy stuff to do with it, or they'd try to like use it on like deployables and like send munitions at things. But that was one that I still think has some means of coming back, and I really like to see how we can incorporate that. But then you're in the realm of physics again, and physics in multiplayer games is we've already seen all the fun things that happen in our game because of physics, but here we are.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this. Like I said, if it's not obvious, at this point. I'm a huge Arc Raiders nerd.
Appreciate it.
I cannot recommend this game enough to our listeners. This is a really great chat. I love talking design with you, and really looking forward to all the new stuff that's coming for Arc Raiders.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.